All right, so I've done a bunch of Feedback Fridays reviewing my students' real estate videos, and I put together a list of the top 10 mistakes I commonly see you guys making. And we'll rehash a lot of the tips from the previous two videos, but showing you video examples of people doing the opposite of those tips. So this video should help you identify some of those mistakes before you make them on your next real estate shoot. Mistake number one is not wide enough lenses. I talk about this a lot, and yet I still see a lot of you using too tight of lenses. I assume it's because you don't want to have to buy a new lens just for real estate, but I hate to break it to you, if you're going to shoot real estate and you don't have a wide angle lens, you gotta buy one. Making the rooms feel big and spacious is a huge selling point for real estate and will help the agent feel like you did a good job in helping them sell the home, which will increase the likelihood of him hiring you to shoot more. Again, I recommend around a 16mm focal length on a full frame lens, so that means if you're shooting on an APS-C lens, you need to be around a 10 or 11mm. Or if you're on a micro 4/3 camera, you want to be around an 8mm. But I see some of you guys shooting on kit lenses that are equivalent to around a 24 to 30mm on a full frame camera, and that's just not going to be wide enough for most rooms. For outdoors and aerials, that focal length is fine because you have a lot more space to back up because you're not in these tight spaces. But for the interior rooms, you need wide angle lenses. Tip number two is filming unimportant details of the house. I see a lot of your videos featuring and focusing on insignificant features that aren't great selling points or even included in the purchase of the house at all. For example, I'll see people doing close-ups of shots of tables or vases on top of tables, objects that the buyers aren't even going to get if they buy the home. Or I see shots of you honing in on very average details like toilets, sinks, shower heads, things that every standard house has. Now, unless there's a really unique sink or a rainfall shower or a golden toilet, it's not a good idea to film close-up shots of those details. If there's nothing special about it, I wouldn't bother featuring it. Remember that you're selling the home, not the furniture and decorations inside the home. But here's an example of a feature within a room that is unique and different that merits a detail shot focusing just on it. The next big mistake I see is framing. The biggest mistake I see here is people not having a dominant subject. Make it easy for the viewer to know what they're supposed to be focusing on. I've seen times where someone's shooting a room, but they're either not centered on the room or they're in between two rooms focusing on the dividing wall in the middle. Make it very clear where your audience should be looking. The next common mistake I see is unnatural or jarring camera movements. Again, this is personal preference, but I see a lot of you doing moving backward shots, which to me is kind of unnatural because you would be touring a house moving forward. I'd say that 90% of the shots I use are in some sort of way moving forward, but also motion isn't always good motion if it's not smooth motion. So another common problem I see is shots that just aren't smooth. People using glide cams or cheap versions of glide cams that make it feel like you're on a rocking boat. You have to make sure your stabilizer is balanced before every shot. And if you shoot a shot and it's not perfectly smooth, then retake it. I also see a lot of people with motorized gimbals or with their drones shooting very jarring panning movements that look way too robotic and unprofessional. Make sure to watch my favorite motorized gimbal settings and my favorite drone settings to see how you can reduce the likelihood of those jarring panning movements. And if you do accidentally make one of those panning movements that's super jarring in your footage, redo the take until you get the shot smooth. The next big mistake I see is movements that are too fast. Slow down your movements. Remember, we're touring a house. When you tour a house, you're walking slowly, not briskly. You're not jogging. I see a lot of people moving through each room way too fast, not giving the viewer enough time to soak in what the room really feels like. Or making panning movements that are way too fast, giving it too much motion blur and making the viewer feel nauseous. Keep all your movements nice and slow. Again, something that can help with this is shooting at 60 frames and then slowing it down to 24 frames per second. Speaking of slow, the next mistake I see often is people putting too many fast-paced, fancy transitions in their real estate videos. In general, I see people overusing these fancy transitions, but especially in slower-paced videos like real estate, I recommend sticking to mostly clean cuts. Sometimes I'll use a speed ramp here or there to help transition between one clip or another or to speed up the whole edit, but looking back on some of my real estate videos I've done, I think I've overdone the speed ramps a little bit too. Now, this really comes down to personal creativity and the preferences of the real estate agents, but generally, I think the video looks cleaner and more professional with less fancy transitions. If you use those smooth zoom transitions more than once or twice per video, then it kind of loses its flair and becomes over the top. The next big mistake I see often is too many drone shots in the final edit. I see this happening in general, but especially with real estate videos, people are overusing their drone shots. There's only so many angles you can film from the outside of a house, so I can't see the need for more than maybe 10 drone shots in the final video unless there's just so many cool things to show off outside. But you need to think that the potential buyer is going to be spending most of their time living inside the house, so the video should be more focused on the interior than the exterior. But one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm looking for an Airbnb house to rent is when they show 15 photos of the outside of the house and all these surrounding amenities, and then they give me like 3 photos of what the room and kitchen look like. And I'm like, really? You can't give me a few more photos to know what the house looks like that I'm going to be staying in for a few days? So don't get too drone happy just because you love your drone shots. Focus on making the content relevant and informative for your viewer. The next big mistake I see a lot is poor color balance or unnatural color grades. You got to make sure that you're changing your color balance from room to room and from outdoor to indoor. I see a lot of outdoor shots that are too blue and a lot of indoor shots that are too orange. Don't use auto white balance because sometimes your camera is going to guess incorrectly and be way off. Learn how to manually set that white balance for every room, making sure your whites look white and not blue or orange. And once you bring that footage into post, I see a lot of you trying to give your footage a cinematic orange and teal look by throwing on some heavy LUTs. They want it to be the color they actually are. So be careful not to get too carried away with color grades that make your colors look cinematic instead of natural. The next big mistake I see is poor storytelling. Some of your real estate videos that I watch are super confusing to follow. I have a hard time knowing where in the house I am and how it relates to the previous shot I just watched. Sometimes I'll see a video with a drone shot in the backyard, then it cuts to the kitchen, then the next shot is a drone shot of the front yard, and then to the master bedroom. Give your edits some kind of story so that they flow together. And again, the story that you're usually trying to tell is taking a viewer on a tour of the house. So generally, you want to start at the front, walk in, go through the house, and walk to the back and so on. Doesn't have to be anything set in stone, but just make it somewhat fluid. On this note, I see sometimes people showing 3 or 4 different angles of the exact same room back to back. Again, there's only a few rooms that might need more than one angle shown, so don't get too angle happy showing a bunch of different angles of the exact same thing. The point is, put some time into the placement of the clips to make sure it's telling a cohesive story. The last big mistake we'll mention here is poor music choice. Again, this is a general mistake I see in any industry. You want a song that fits the mood and creates the emotions you're trying to convey. But as it applies to real estate videos, the emotions you're usually trying to convey is peaceful, inviting, comfortable, etc. So you don't want songs that are too fast-paced, but you also don't want songs that are too slow and boring either. Again, I've given you 10 songs by the way made that I've used for real estate videos that have worked out well, so feel free to use those and contact Brendo if you'd like to license one. But even when people pick a good song, sometimes their pacing is still off. The clips are too long or too short. And again, I'll talk more about the pacing in the full process of showing you how I edit these real estate videos. But that's it, guys, for the top 10 mistakes that I see in real estate videos. Hopefully this will help you avoid making the same mistakes in your upcoming real estate videos. But that's it. If you have any further questions for me, please let me know.